In 1996, shortly after the release of the N64, Nintendo teamed up with HR company Recruit to found Marigul Management. Their job was to fund and assist in the development of new N64 games, to try and make up for its lack of third-party support. However, only a handful of games came from their involvement. While more were in development, only 5 ever came out for the N64. Custom Robo 1 and 2 from Noise, Doshin the Giant and its expansion pack from Param, and Hey You Pikachu from Umbrella. There's also technically Cubivore from Saru Brune, which was originally in development for N64, but was delayed and ended up releasing on GameCube. But as it turns out, this wasn't all Marigul were up to. In a weekly Famitsu article with Marigul's director Tetsu Kayama, he explained that Marigul wanted to help creators make games, but because it was a joint venture with Nintendo, that made it harder if the creator wanted to work on PlayStation. As a result, they created Celio Studio to deal with these non-Nintendo games, which all ended up being either developed or published by Media Factory. If they were meant to be making games for the N64, then why would they do this? In an Iwata Asks interview from 2012, Iwata explained that Marigul raised funds from investors, invested those funds into game studios, and then returned a portion of the profit back to those investors. If they were struggling to find studios to make games for the N64 because they wanted to work on PlayStation, then finding a way to make that happen so they can continue to stay funded makes sense. As for why Media Factory, well, it was also a subsidiary of Recruit, and Tetsu Kayama was the director of both companies. Mystery solved pretty quickly there. I imagine they had the freedom to do this because Marigul was only partly owned by Nintendo, but still it is rather strange to think that they are responsible for these games getting funding and development assistance. Thankfully, finding the games that Marigul supported Media Factory with isn't hard to do, as this article, as well as this GameSpot translation of it I used as a reference, announced pretty much everything that Celio Studio were doing from what I could tell. Which is incredibly helpful because only one of these games ever references them by name, and trying to search for them online in English or Japanese returns nothing. So I think they were probably just a name for an internal team at Marigul, rather than a separate company or anything like that. From PlayStation to Dreamcast, and even Sega games released on Game Boy and Super Famicom, here are the games Marigul helped make for Nintendo's rivals. Using the GameSpot article for translation made finding some of these games very interesting, because either due to translation differences or maybe referring to the games using in-development titles, their names don't often quite match up with what they released as. Not for this first one though, as Kero Kero King is actually just what the game is called. A prequel to Ribbit King, Kero Kero King was released on the PS1 in 2000. It's essentially a golf game, but with frogs instead of golf balls, creating a new sport called Frolf, or Kerof as it's known as here. It's oddly story heavy for a golf game, but I dig that. I love how this game looks, I love its fun gameplay, even if I got absolutely destroyed by the CPU. Launch the frog with a sound effect suspiciously similar to that of a Koopa shell in Super Mario World, and try to get it into the hole. I like the extra layer of chaos the frog adds to the game, like how it will jump to eat nearby flies, which can be good or bad for you depending on where they are, resulting in some crazy combos that can lead you to be miles away from where you actually landed. I liked it a lot, though I think if I do want to check it out properly, I'll be sticking with Ribbit King so I can actually understand the game and hang out with the funny gay referee alien.
Oh, me? Why, I'm a referee! Anyway, your opponents are all waiting. Let's go kick off the Frolf Tournament Tour!
A referee? Are they always that creepy?
Seems like a really good party game. I think I'm gonna have to force some friends to play this with me. In the credits, we see Marigul Management under Management, and Saruga Kucho under Debugging and Tuning. Saruga Kucho were the quality control department of Marigul, who would do debugging and quality assurance work on games. They're actually still around, going independent from Marigul in 2001, and have since worked on games like Elden Ring, the Silent Hill 2 remake, and Neo 3. And they would go on to do game tuning for Ribbit King as well. The next game from the article is called Angel, which ended up releasing as EnEn Angel, and I think this is the game that made me understand what Marigul were doing with the PS1. Like EnEn Angel and even Kero Golf, they're just the most PlayStation-ass looking PlayStation games ever, right? Like, the type of game that looks and feels so PlayStation that it's impossible to imagine it ever existing on N64. The kind of game that's so niche and small that even the cost of producing the N64 cartridges would bankrupt the studio trying to make it. Having a division to make games for the PlayStation just suddenly makes so much sense. EnEn Angel is fun. Released in 2001 and developed by D-Crews, this game kinda melted my brain a little to begin with. Taking place on a small circular disc, I guess all discs are circular, your goal is to either kill all the enemies, or if you want a high score, change the colour of all the panels by walking over them. You can rotate each layer of the disc to move the tiles more in your favour, and change your speed to try and hit the tiles you want. It was very overwhelming at first, but after a while I got the hang of it, and it's cool. Maybe a little too repetitive for my liking, there's very little variety in the levels, but I could see myself coming back to it every now and then to chip away at slowly but surely. You can also use the points you earn to unlock toys that you find, getting silly little animations of the silly little guy playing with them. Very cute. In the credits, we see Saruga Kucho again for testing, with Marigul in brackets next to it. Gourmet Frontier was a hard one to find, but looking at what games Media Factory released, I think the only thing that makes sense for it to be is Tenkuu No Restaurant, released for the PS1 by Createch. It's a party game based around a game board, and from what I was able to figure out, your goal is to move around the board collecting ingredients to try and make the best and most expensive meals. Once a meal is judged, that space will be marked, and whenever another player lands on it, they have to pay the price of that meal. Again though, game is entirely in Japanese, I can't say much more than that. It seems fine, if you're into this kind of game, I guess. A year later, it got a crossover version with Hello Project, a Japanese idol collective, which seems to be the version of the game that is most well known, and the one I was able to find the credits for. Saruga Kucho once again makes an appearance here. Okay, David? What the hell is David for PS1? I looked at every game Media Factory published, and there was nothing remotely close to David, so either it never came out, or this is somehow referring to The Spirit Hour, Kizoku Ikeda's Psychic Laboratory, the only other PS1 game that Media Factory released that I can find. And oh my god, check this shit out. David or not, this game is awesome and I have to talk about it. Based on the work of rock musician turned ghost hunter Kizoku Ikeda, you're sent in to investigate a spooky house with mysterious spooky things happening inside. Slowly mooching around, it controls like Kingsfield, but with point and click elements, as you poke and prod anything and everything that looks interesting and oh my god, look at this menu, holy shit. This game has an incredibly extensive encyclopedia on all sorts of paranormal topics, and while one isn't available yet, an English translation is in the works, and I will absolutely be coming back to check it out when it's ready. I played the game for like 15 minutes, it had great atmosphere, great scares. I had to stop myself from playing more because I want to be able to fully appreciate it. But like, okay, is it David though? Like, surely the name couldn't have been that far off. The fact that Media Factory published it just has to be a coincidence. I mean, it's not like if you looked at the back of the game's box where it showed who made it that you'd see Marigul's name or anything. Oh, okay, yeah. So, I'll be real, I started looking into this game just because I thought it looked cool. I didn't actually think I would find a Marigul connection here, but I am so happy to be proven wrong. Is this David? I do not know, but it is another Marigul game. I thought I'd have the same thing happen with the only Dreamcast game on this list too, Devil. The only two games on the system with Devil in the name are both from Ubisoft, so it's not those. And the only game Media Factory released for the Dreamcast was Culdcept II, a sequel to a Sega Saturn game, so surely already being part of an established franchise, they would have just used that name. I thought to myself, looking up the box art anyway, and sure enough, Omayasoft, supported by Marigul. Originally released on Dreamcast in 2001, the game got a PS2 port and a United States release 2 years later, which is what I played here, so I actually knew what I was doing. It's basically Monopoly crossed with a deck builder. If you land on a space, you can summon a monster and claim it as yours, and then if another player lands there, they can either take the L and pay the rent they owe you, or choose to fight the monster, stealing the space from you if they win. I had never heard of this series in my life before making this video, but I really enjoyed it, especially all of the incredible faces it has. Some of the greatest the game industry has ever seen. So many good faces. This game got its hooks into me, which I was not expecting because I've never played a deck builder before in my life, unless Lost Kingdoms and Balatro count. Vote now in the comments if they do. Of all the games I had to play for this video, this is the one that I've kept playing in my free time. I've been having a blast with it, even if the luck aspect of the game does drive me mental at times. You gotta have patience for it and go into it with the right mindset, because being kinda like Monopoly, even at the start of the game, these battles are hitting over 40 minutes long, which makes it incredibly devastating if you lose. It's starting to click though. I'm slowly learning to change my strategy as I play, adjusting to the luck that I get, and it felt incredibly satisfying to use the cards in my favour to fleece my opponent for over 1,000 gold in one turn. I will definitely be keeping an eye on this series in the future, which is convenient because I apparently picked the best time to randomly stumble into it. Both a port of the original Culdcept, the first time it's released in English, and the first brand new game in the series in a decade are both coming out this month. Depending on how long it took me to make this video, they might already be out by the time you're watching this. Like, what are the odds? If you're wondering, by the way, why Satoru Iwata was talking about Marigul in 2012, Culdcept is why, talking about a then upcoming entry in the series for 3DS. Anyway, both Marigul and Sarugakucho appear in the credits. In the original Dreamcast version anyway, Marigul was removed from PS2. The article implies this next game was meant for Dreamcast, but it actually ended up releasing for the PS2 in 2001. Gofungo No Sekai, 5 Minutes from Nowhere, is a visual novel based on the 1994 non-visual novel The World in 5 Minutes from Now by Ryu Murakami. It follows the protagonists as they accidentally stumble into a parallel world 5 minutes into the future from where they entered, where Japan didn't surrender in World War II. War continued to ravage the country until the population dwindled to only around 250,000 people living underground. It sounds really interesting and is apparently a great book, but both the book and this game have never been translated into English, so I can't tell you much more about it than that, or how accurate a retelling the game is. There is a full playthrough on Japanese YouTube though, if you were interested in looking into it more for yourself. This is the only game where I was able to find Cydio Studio mentioned in the credits. Finally, we have an unnamed PS1 game that wasn't announced in the Famitsu article, but I was able to find mentioned in a time extension article that was originally posted on Nintendo Life, talking about an interview with Yasuho Nakajima, which was originally published in the book The Untold History of Japanese Game Developers Volume 3. Whew. In it, Nakajima talks about an RTS game they worked on for the PlayStation at a company called Aquamarine that Marigul were involved with, though the game never ended up releasing. I can't find anything else about this, so I'd have to assume it was going to be published by Media Factory as well, but if not, there could be other Marigul games out there that I wouldn't even begin to know where to start searching for them. So that's all of the games that Marigul had a hand in helping create for PlayStation and Dreamcast, and as you may have noticed, they got more games out for them than they did the N64, which is kinda nuts, right? However, the N64 wasn't the only Nintendo console that Marigul worked on, as they actually developed and helped create several Media Factory published games for both the Super Famicom and Game Boy Color, including some based on Sega properties. Columns is one of these titles, an enhanced port of the Sega Mega Drive version with some additions like a versus mode, a falling block puzzle game in a similar vein to Tetris. What I find even more fascinating than the fact this game even exists is how much later it was released than the original. Columns came out for the Mega Drive in 1990, got 2 sequels quickly afterwards, and didn't come to Super Famicom until 1999, an incredibly late release with the console, so what's going on there? Well, that's because Columns, and every Marigul Super Famicom game from what I could see, were released exclusively via Nintendo Power. Nintendo Power was a Marigul project that launched in 1997, headed by Masanobu Endo from Game Studio. It was conceived as a way of prolonging the sales of Super Famicom games at a time when the N64 was struggling. Using a special blank cartridge, you could go to any Lawson in Japan and use the Nintendo Power kiosk to download up to 8 games onto it, for way cheaper than it would cost to buy the game brand new. It's a fascinating piece of gaming history I knew nothing about, especially because of its longevity. It was still active at the same time as the Wii shopping channel, all the way up to 2007. If you want to learn more about it, I highly recommend the Did You Know Gaming video on it. It's really thorough and covers a lot of the exclusive games released for it that aren't relevant to this video. So getting back to Media Factory, Marigul, and Nintendo Power, Columns wasn't the only game they produced. To quickly rattle through them, we have Okaki Logic 1 and 2, which are Picross games. There's also Tamagotchi Town, a game about developing a town for Tamagotchis to live in, if you can believe it. Finally, at least I think so from what I can find, there was a port of Wizardry 1, 2, and 3. Based on the Famicom game, which was originally developed by Game Studio again, this new version was handled by a studio called Gung Ho, with assistance from Marigul and Saruga Kucho. Definitely the most interesting game of the bunch for me, though sadly not one I can properly appreciate because I suck ass at it. It is such a hard and evil game, so I think I gotta work my way up to playing it sometime, which I wanna try and do. It looks cool. Finally, for the Nintendo consoles, we have the Game Boy Color and Sakura Wars, one of Sega's biggest franchises once upon a time, which originally began on the Sega Saturn. They combine tactical turn-based battles with life sim and visual novel elements, where the decisions you make influence the story and your relationships with your teammates. and in 2000, between the release of 2 and 3, it got a Game Boy Color spin-off developed by Jupiter. It was a surprise announcement by Kayama in this Famitsu article, so surprising that even Sega were caught off guard by it. They had to release a statement shortly after, clarifying that while they had been approached by Kayama to release a Sakura Wars game on the Game Boy, Sega's prerequisite was that it would only happen if it could connect to a Dreamcast. If Kayama had made the announcement, he must be sure that it would be possible, and they looked forward to seeing his plans. Those plans never came to fruition, the peripheral never got made, but the game still came out, and there is leftover data in it that shows what it would have been. A peripheral you would plug into the side of a Game Boy that would detect certain signals shown on screen in the first game's Dreamcast remake. If you want to know more, I highly recommend Matobi's video on the peripheral, as well as their broader video about Sakura Wars GB and what a weird little game it is. They are definitive videos on the game and go way more in depth about it all than I ever possibly could. Also, as you've probably seen throughout the video, they were also kind enough to send me some scans of the Famitsu article I've been referring to a lot, which were not available anywhere online from what I could tell. So thank you so much, it would have been very hard to make this video without them. Anyway, my thoughts on the game are pretty much worthless because it relies heavily on you having played the first game to fully understand it, which I hadn't done when I tried it for myself. Oops. I did check it out after though for footage, and enjoyed what I played if that's worth anything. In the credits, Marigul isn't listed, but Tetsu Kayama is there under executive producer, and so is Saruga Kucho. So those were all the games that were brought up in this article, but I doubt it's a complete list of everything Marigul were up to. Media Factory had 2 other Dreamcast games in development that never came out, called Alex Virus Composer and Alexander Road to Persia. Not quite sure what's up with the Alex theme, but it's likely they could have also had help from Marigul. Though that isn't a guarantee. Zoc Zoc Heroes for the Game Boy was published by Media Factory and Marigul worked on that, but Super Robot Pinball, which Media Factory also published, Marigul didn't work on that. They also didn't seem to work on Japan Pro Golf Tour 64, despite being a Media Factory published game for the N64, the console they were meant to be making games for, though Saruga Kucho did work on Derby Stallion 64. It's all over the place basically. It was an incredibly strange time in Nintendo's history that I cannot believe I had never heard about before. I have only started to scratch the surface of what is out there to learn, so if you'd like to know more about Marigul, I have another video that goes way more in depth about their entire history. This video is an extract from that one, just to have the Dreamcast, PS1 and Sega stuff separate and easily discoverable, so it didn't get lost at the end of an hour-long video talking about way more than just this. So if you liked this video, I hope you consider checking it out to learn even more about this bizarre company. From the N64 games that came out, to the ones that got cancelled, and even how it cost its director, Tetsu Kayama, a potential future job as the president of Sega. I'll see you over there if you decide to check it out, but if not, thanks for watching anyway, I hope you enjoyed this.